Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my May wrap up. Slightly belated. As you can see, I'm not in my normal filming space. I'm actually up in Donegal at the moment and I just wanted to get this filmed, so I stuck myself in front of some of the bookshelves that we have up here, which are very, very sun-bleached books, as you can see. I'm not sure how many of them have actually been read, so yeah, books are books. So yeah, I had a really good reading month in May, so I want to get straight on into it and tell you all about the books that I read. Obviously I don't actually have the ones that I did read physically, I don't actually have with me, so everything will just be a picture that I'll put up beside me as I am talking about them. The first book is a book I received from Book Break UK in exchange for an honest review, and that was The Attic Child by Lola Jaye. This is a historical fiction that is told in two timelines, following a timeline in the early 1900s, and we are following a young boy as he is taken from his home in the Congo to become kind of a companion slash almost like a weird kind of project for this English traveller. And we see this young boy as his name is stripped away from him, his culture is stripped away from him, and he's kind of shaped to be and educated to be the perfect English gentleman. And we see this boy really struggle with this, really struggle with homesickness. He misses his family, he doesn't know why he was taken away. He enjoys learning and he enjoys his education, but he comes to really resent the man who took him away from his family. And we are following a young woman in the late 90s. She inherits this house and she goes back to this house, which is very bad memories for her growing up, and then she ends up finding a connection between herself and this house and a young boy who is the boy that we are following, and he lived in the same house years earlier. And she starts trying to find out what happened to this boy, how like their lives are connected in some way, and yeah, she starts to find out what happened to this boy after he left the house that he had grown up in and the house that she grew up in as well. This is actually this whole story was inspired by a real picture of a boy who was a companion to an English traveller, and this boy who was taken away from his home and kind of, you know, brought it up to be kind of this English gentleman, and he ended up dying quite young. And the author saw this picture in, I think, a museum or in an exhibition, and she was really struck by the sadness and the loneliness that she saw on this boy's face, and she wanted to give him a better story and kind of like, you know, a happier story, a happier end to that story. So she created this new boy, like, you know, inspired by the picture that she'd seen. And I did definitely like reading about, I think it's Dikembe his name is. I really enjoy hearing about Dikembe's you know, time in the Congo, his ways of trying to connect to his past and to his family and remembering them. And it was really hard. There are some, like, you know, kind of child abuse moments in this book through Dikembe's story and the other story with the young woman. They are both abused as children in terms of just like physical abuse, like emotional abuse, and you know, that is really tough to read at times. I did find the overall tone and narration of this book a little bit stilted and formal, and because of that it became like a little bit boring to read. There was no real excitement in the story for me, and while I did enjoy seeing Dikembe's journey, especially after he left the house and what he did and how he made a life, and some of that was really, really interesting, and how he made his fortune in a way, you know, overall the tone was so stiff that I didn't just find myself really excited about the book in any way. So I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I do recommend for people who like historical fiction, who like maybe a different type of historical fiction than what they're used to reading, but yeah, the tone of it just wasn't there for me. Another book I read, with this one was an audiobook, it was also historical fiction, and that was The Undertaking by Audrey Magee. This one was quite interesting because in this one we are actually following a couple who are living in Germany during World War II, and these are Germans who, you know, believe in, you know, like I guess like what Hitler is saying, the Nazi party, this, you know, superior Aryan race, like everything that has been preached to them through all the propaganda that Hitler and the Nazi party are sharing. These people are kind of believing it. We are following a young soldier who ends up marrying a woman that he has never seen, and it was kind of this I guess a scheme or this thing that happened during the war, which I actually had never known about before. So the German soldiers married these girls they'd never met before, so they could get honeymoon leave, which meant they could leave the front for a week or however many days it was. And then the girls they married, so if their husband died during the war, they would then receive a widow's pension, and they end up being really attracted to each other. They end up falling in love with each other during their honeymoon stage, but then obviously the young man, he's sent back to war, and then the young girl is left in Berlin with her parents, who aren't particularly nice parents. They're a little bit like overbearing and critical of her, and her father is a real true kind of believer in the Nazi party, and he's doing things that are quite sketchy and quite uncomfortable sometimes to read about. And so it's so uncomfortable reading this and seeing them move into this lovely new apartment, where you know why they moved into this new apartment and like what had happened to the family that had been there, and like this real stubborn, almost obliviousness of the character that we're following, the female character. She doesn't really think about why they suddenly have these places available, and she doesn't really think about, you know, where this lovely jewelry and like clothes that she's suddenly like wearing, where they came from. We also see throughout the war, as different things happen, how their belief in the reason of this war, their belief in the fatherland in a way kind of gets stripped away, and they become really ravaged by the war, and they're, you know, they stop believing so much in what they're doing is right, but also the fact that, you know, this belief that they're just going to win because they are the best, and they start really realizing that maybe they won't win and things aren't going to go as good for them. Yeah, it was quite grim reading, but I still enjoyed it. There is a bit at the end where, you know, the Russian occupation of Germany, and we can kind of imagine what was happening between the Russian soldiers and the women, and there is a particularly like distressing sexual assault rape scene with the main character in this that was, you know, it was just very hard to listen to. But I did quite enjoy this one, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read a book that had been longlisted for the Women's Prize. This was The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley-Heller, and in this book we are following a woman who is in her 50s. Her name is Elle, and we follow her the moment where it's the morning after she had slept with her best friend the night before, and she's married, her best friend is married, and the two of them have known each other for a really long time, and they finally kind of given in to the feelings between them. And then she starts to look back through kind of, you know, her early childhood and growing up in her family, in her kind of like slightly dysfunctional family, back and forth between her past and her childhood, and then her present day with her best friend slash lover and her husband, and what she is doing with all of that. This book is a really fast read. I absolutely flew through this one. I think because of the way the story is told and the flashbacks and forward, it just reads really fast, and you get really kind of addicted to Elle's story and her childhood, her teenage years, and why Elle makes the decisions that she makes throughout, and why it leads up to this ultimate decision for her to finally sleep with her best friend. What shaped her to become the woman she is in the first moment we met her. I really loved reading up until that point. There are scenes of sexual abuse and assault in this book that are, you know, hard to read, and there are kind of references to child abuse as well. So yeah, this one was one that I definitely just felt really enthralled with. I definitely like fell into the story really quickly, and I really enjoyed reading it. I read it really quickly, as I said. One of the very end scenes, I actually reread it a couple of times to try and figure out what had actually happened, what I think had happened, and I really feel like the author writes it in a way that leaves it to the reader to decide what they want to have happened and what they want Elle to have decided for herself and for her life. A friend of mine had actually read this before me, and she had told me that it was really good, which was one of the reasons why I had wanted to read it as well. So we had fun kind of being able to discuss that last moment, discuss the book in general, but then also discuss that last scene and what we thought it meant, and that was just really fun. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read the final revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnie, Walton, and this is a book that is set around the like the 70s, and we're following this pop punk duo Opal and Nev as they get together during the 70s and become this kind of sensation because of this one night that happened where there was these riots in a concert that they were playing, and a man died, and because of that they kind of catapulted to fame in a way, almost in like a cult-like way. And we are following a journalist as she is interviewing Nev and Opal, and it feels like they are going to be doing kind of a revival. They're going to come back for kind of a reunion concert and tour. We learned straight away that she is connected to Opal and Nev in a way that it was her father that actually died during this concert, and we know that her father had a connection with Opal. She kind of gets, I guess, Opal and Nev's life story. She finds out what really happened that day that her father died, and in the years after that, and what actually split Opal and Nev up, and like how they kind of continued the rest of their celebrity journey. This was interesting. This was definitely kind of told in almost like a interview slash documentary style format, in a similar way to say like Daisy Jones and the Six and Evelyn Hugo. So focuses quite heavily on race, and we see Opal talking about her I guess her experience and her role as a black woman, and a black woman in music, and a black woman in music that has a story to tell and a message to share with people, and how she is treated by a lot of different people within the music industry, especially as for a lot of her time, like, the person that she was singing with was a white man, and how she is treated throughout all of that, and how she was just treated as a black woman in general, by the press, by fans, and everyone in the music industry. It was a reveal like halfway through, and I couldn't figure out where else we were going after that, because it felt like this really big twist, and I was like, okay, this is going to be really interesting. I'm like very intrigued to see what happens from here and what the characters do with this information. And I don't know, I just felt a little bit like disappointed by it. I wasn't as like entranced with this book as I wanted it to be. I really wanted to love it a lot, and it was fine. It was like a 3.5 out of 5 stars, but it just wasn't anything amazing for me, and I really wanted it to be amazing. But I think other people will really love this one, and it just didn't really hit me the way I wanted it to, but it was still a really solid read. Then I read The Snag List by Sophie. This is an adult contemporary book set in Ireland, and we follow 3 women as they move into this like luxury housing estate with their husband and partners, and we see each of these women struggle with different things in their life, such as, you know, like job, career, family, like husbands, relationships, all these different type of things, and they just support each other throughout all their decisions. And we're seeing the women go through like different things. One of the women is struggling with deciding whether she wants to have a baby with her partner, and he is like very much on board with them having a baby, and she's kind of lying to him about trying for a baby, but she's actually still using contraception because she just can't seem to tell him that, you know, she just doesn't want this right now. And then there's a woman who has been married for a good while with her husband, and her and her husband actually have kind of a YouTube family channel where like the main star of this channel is their son, and the husband is really involved in this channel, and she's starting to think that maybe it isn't such a good idea that, you know, they have this channel, that it's like not very beneficial to their son, and it seems to be stressing him out, and they should stop it, but it's like their main source of income as creators. And that's a really interesting kind of storyline within this book around influencers, like the culture around influencers, and how influencers actually make their money, and like where their future lies in, you know, it's just, yeah, it's very particularly kind of like family influencers and family content creators where they involve children. So that was a really interesting kind of just subplot within the book. And then the third character we're following has gotten married and has had a baby with her husband, but she actually doesn't really know if the baby is actually her husband's, because before they were engaged and before they got pregnant, she had a one-night stand with someone else. So she is kind of trying to figure out if her husband is actually her baby's father, and she's also dealing with some alcohol issues as well, as she's like trying to figure this out. A lot going on for all of the women. This was just fun. There were parts of it around the housing estate where it felt almost like dystopian-esque in a way, like this really luxury housing estate, commune than an estate, and they had all like secret tunnels to these different places, and they would all go on holidays together, and it was like really weird. And I feel like it almost felt like it should have been a whole separate story in a way. Like it could have been, this housing estate in itself could have been a book by itself, and all the weird things going on in there. The contemporary story with the women and their families and all these issues felt, they just didn't mesh together properly, and I felt like the author maybe was trying to do 2 separate things that just didn't fit together as well as she probably wanted them to. I kind of would have actually liked more a whole storyline, because it felt very Black Mirror-esque in a way, and I felt like there was definitely a story about this housing estate. It just wasn't the story that it ended up being for me. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars as well. Then I read a non-fiction book. This is Never Work with Animals by Gareth Steele. This is a book that's basically like a combination of James Herriot's All Creatures Great and Small, and then This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. So this book is a memoir by Gareth Steele about his life as a vet. So we see him like as he leaves college, becomes kind of like a junior vet, and he's detailing really like the type of work that vets have to do, the really tough hours, like the sleeplessness, the bad pay, the fact that they often like, you know, go to farms and other places, and they're like almost, there's times they're like literally assaulted by the farmers when they give the farmers like bad news about their pets, that they don't want, like things around TB with cows, and how devastating that can be for farmers and as a vet in general in terms of like pets, dogs, cats, all of those. He has like different stories that are just, some of them are fun, some of them are sad, some of them are very frustrating to read. I do think there were parts of it that were a little bit preachy on the author's side around different things like he kind of talks about like the UK stance with TB and cows, and then he also talks about vaccines, which, you know, is an important conversation, but I feel like he kind of goes into like things a little bit too much. Like it feels like there were like pages that could have been cut, so I did feel at times when he went on this kind of like big mansplainy like, you know, rant about different things that he felt really passionate about. I was like, I actually don't really need to know any of this. Like, you know, like, I think it's a good idea to like really stress the importance of vaccinations with your animals and with people as well, but also, I mean, I don't need to know like this whole history about vaccinations or this whole science, like chemistry lesson around the vaccines. Like, I don't need to know any of that. So I would have liked a few more like happier stories in amongst the other stories that he shares. A lot of the stories he shares are actually a little bit depressing, and like the, you know, really focuses on some of the cruelty or negligence of some owners. I could have done a few less of them and a few more of like the funnier, happier stories that you kind of see in more like, you know, James Herriot style. So yeah, this was a 3.5 to 4 stars. I enjoyed it, but again, I would have liked a little bit more of happier, cute stories as well as like the kind of sad, depressing ones. Oh, and it also should be said that going into this book, you should be okay reading stories around like animals who are like hurt, who have been abused, or, you know, animals, you know, being put down and stuff like that. So that's obviously all in this book, so you kind of have to be okay with that if you're going to go into it. Then I read All Along the Echo by Dawnie Denton. This is a book that I had on a couple of other videos, kind of Irish releases this year and TBRs and stuff like that. So this one is slightly dystopian. We're in an Ireland that is not too far from like where we are now. They kind of talk about COVID-19 and the pandemic and stuff in this book, but we also know that there's like a whole bunch of terrorist attacks that have been happening in Europe, but in particular London, and because of this a bunch of Irish people who've been living in London are returning home. So we follow this radio host as he kind of travels around the country on this, like, it's kind of like a PR competition for a car company, and he's talking to people who he's trying to find people who have emigrated back to Ireland. One of the things I liked about this book was I liked the format of it, because you have like an on-air format where you get like interviews and like, you know, on-air radio segments, and then you also get the off-air stuff where you kind of learn a little bit more about all the characters we're following in their day-to-day lives. So we're following the radio host, his producer. We also follow a young girl whose family is suffering from homelessness, and that story actually didn't really go anywhere now that I think about it. The big things about it for me was the format. I love the off-air, on-air format. It was really quick to read because a lot of the book was told in interview style format because of the radio in it. I kind of enjoyed the reading kind of about the radio host and the producer, particularly the radio host. I feel like he was very much a portrayal of a lot of men, particularly men, in radio and media, and they have like they're slightly egotistical in a way where, like, you know, they like the sound of their own voice, they like sharing their own stories about things, like they listen to the people who they're talking to, but they're also eager to like jump in and tell like their own stories and all of this. I just enjoyed how he was portrayed in that. I just felt he was quite realistic in a way. Another 3-star read for me. This one wouldn't be for everyone, but I did find it interesting, and I do always find Dawnie Denton, like his writing and the world he portrays and the fact that he does these like dystopian Irelands, I always enjoy seeing what he comes up with. So yeah, even though this one wasn't an absolute like amazing book for me, I would still be interested in reading more of what Dawnie Denton comes up with, because I think he's just an interesting writer. And then I listened to Tara Road by Maeve Binchy on audiobook, and this was a long audiobook. This was like 20 hours long or something. And yeah, this is like kind of, I've read a Maeve Binchy book before, but this is one of like her main, like, more well-known books that I've read. So this is the only second book I've read, and I wanted to read kind of one of her really well-known ones. This one is kind of like, you know, the movie The Holiday. It's kind of like that, but set in between Ireland and Connecticut, and is set kind of during summer instead of winter. Following a character at the start of this book called Rhea, as she is a young woman, and then she gets into a relationship with a man called Danny, and we just follow their lives as they move into this house on Tara Road and start doing it up, and they have children, their friends around them, their family, and how, you know, like how things are just kind of ticking away for them over a course of like a couple of years. And then it's almost 20 years down the line. They've been married for like 14-15 years at this stage, and Danny turns around to Rhea and basically tells her that he's after getting this 22-year-old pregnant and he's leaving her to be with this 22-year-old. And Rhea is obviously completely floored by this. She still loves Dawnie. She, you know, thought their marriage was okay, and suddenly she has to be on her own and kind of figure out what to do with herself. She's been like a housewife for like 15 years. She hasn't been working. She has to figure out what to do with her life, and then through like a series of events she ends up getting in touch with this woman called Marilyn in Connecticut, who also is looking to do house swap because she is dealing with grief, and she's also not with her husband at the moment. So the two of them swap houses and kind of swap lives and friends and all of this, and we see Rhea's time in Connecticut and kind of, you know, coming back to herself a little bit, refocusing on herself and what she wants to do, finding out what her passion in life is now. And then we're seeing Marilyn in Dublin, kind of being really like in the smack middle of things with all of Rhea's friends and all of their problems, and finding out some secrets within Rhea's friends' lives and how they're connected to Rhea. Herself is dealing with grief that she hasn't really, you know, faced, and she's starting to be able to face that grief now that she's in Dublin and kind of, yeah, thinking about things a lot. So this was fun. I really enjoyed it. I do think there are parts of it that are a little bit dated, particularly like there's like a domestic abuse storyline in this that I just felt was like treated so weirdly by all of the friends of this woman, and they all knew that she was being like beaten by her husband. It's like dated because of when it was written. It's written in like the 80s, so yeah, some of this is a little bit dated. Character in this that is probably one of the worst two-faced characters I have ever read about in any book, and she didn't get her comeuppance, and I'm so annoyed that she didn't get her comeuppance because, oh my god, she literally is one of the worst characters I've ever read about, just because she is so two-faced and what she did to her friend was so horrible. But yeah, I just kind of had to, I just really wanted her to have a moment, but unfortunately she didn't. So this was a 4-star read for me, and I'll definitely be rereading more of Maeve Binchy's books. Then I picked up The Stars Beneath Our Feet by David Barclay-Moore. This is a kind of a middle grade to YA novel. We're following a boy who is 12 years old. He is living in the projects in New York, and he is struggling with his grief after his brother was gunned down in what I think was like kind of like a gangland shooting, or like a drugs related shooting. His brother was shot, and he's just really struggling to deal with with his grief and his emotions, and he's really angry all of the time because of this. And one of the things he turns to when he's stressed, kind of the thing that calms him down that he likes to do, is he loves to build Lego. And we see him at like an after school, it's kind of like an after school homework club that he's part of, and he starts building Lego during this, and another girl in his class who is autistic starts to help him, and the two of them kind of start this competition with each other to see who can build the most elaborate, like biggest Lego like town in a way. And we see how Lego ends up helping this boy with just what he's dealing with and his emotions. His world starts opening up a little bit more. This was really sweet, and I really enjoyed a lot of the representation in this book. I think this is a book that I would believe that maybe a lot of young children in a similar situation to the characters would be able to read and really see themselves in, and I think it's really important because of that. I do think the author works with autistic children. Hopefully that representation is good, though I can't say it because I'm not reading it from an own voice's perspective at all. I think this book suffered from the author trying to do too much as well. Like, we have the character who is dealing with the grief of his brother, then he himself has been bullied by these other kids, his friend is thinking about going into a gang and like, you know, like thinking like guns and stuff like that, which is really scary, like for 12-year-olds to even have to think about that. And then he's also dealing with his dad, who kind of flits in and out of his life, and then also his mom is in a relationship with another woman. So like there's just a lot of things going on for this kid, and yeah, I kind of feel like a few of those could have been stripped back and could have focused a little bit more on the child's grief and yeah, and what he's going through in that particular moment without all these other external factors coming in. But yeah, this was good. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I do think this author has another book coming out this year, which I will be looking out for. And then I read Stargazer by Laurie Petrou. This is a book that I've actually done kind of a whole reading vlog review for, so I'm not going to say too much about it here. This is a book set in 1995, and we are following two girls as they enter college together, and we're seeing their friendship and how their friendship has developed over the past few years. They've actually were neighbours growing up, but they were never friends until recently. Girls have gone through different things growing up. One of the girls was emotionally abused abused by her brother for years, and then another girl is struggling with having quite a famous family, particularly her mother, and she's struggling with coming out of the shadows of her family and kind of finding her own separate identity away from her family, and it's just really weighing her down, and she's struggling definitely with her mental health. And we're seeing this very intense relationship between the two of them, this female friendship, and this book explores female friendship in a really interesting way. It looks at toxic relationships, at controlling, manipulative relationships. Also a theme in here around like the world of art, artists and their muses, and that relationship as well, and how that relationship can often be a toxic one, or a manipulative one as well. So I really enjoyed this one. I gave it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and would definitely recommend it people to read, but I will leave my whole reading vlog and reviews up above. Then another audiobook I read was Elefant by Martin Suter. This was originally translated from German, I believe. It is set in Switzerland. Looks at kind of genetic engineering. We are following a homeless man who finds this little pink elephant, and at first when he sees this little pink elephant he thinks he's obviously drank too much, and you know, he has alcohol problems, and he thinks that he's finally like done it, and he's definitely like messed with his head because he's seeing little pink elephants. But then he realizes that this elephant is actually real, and he sets about, you know, trying to help her. She's really sick, and he goes to a vet and tries to help her, and the two of them, you know, realize that this is something that's very precious, and they have to look after her. And you know, there could be people out there who are, you know, after her, who could do harm to her, try and figure out how to help this elephant and what to do with her as she grows a little bit bigger, not too much bigger, but a little bit bigger. And then we also see what happened, how this elephant came about through genetic engineering, the scientists behind it, the people who cared for her as she grew in utero, and the people who actually, you know, cared for her to take her away from the scientists who wanted to experiment on her. So this is just like a kind of a funny, slightly sweet novel. Just really love the idea of like a little pink elephant, and I do love the message overall in this, where the author is kind of saying just leave like nature alone. We don't need, as much as cute as they are, we don't need little pink elephants, and you know, we should just leave elephants alone and let them be big elephants in the wild and what they want to do. We don't need little pink elephants as pets. I kind of appreciated the whole message, and I liked how people came together in this book to help this little elephant. And yeah, there are parts of it that were a little bit tense. There were some parts where, you know, you do see a little bit of animal cruelty, particularly around like the world of science and genetic engineering, and how they use the elephants, the elephant mothers, as surrogates for these embryos, and how it affects them and things like that. So yeah, I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy it. I do recommend it, and yeah. And then I read Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. This I read for Laurie in the Book's Patreon book club. This one we are following a woman as she travels to Scotland to help in this rewilding project where they're introducing wolves back into the wild. And this one was really interesting, and it's kind of like part mystery / crime, part literary fiction, and I really loved just the whole exploration around wolves. Wolves like terrify me, but they also are fascinating and gorgeous animals, and I would say that if there were wolves being like put into like the wild part near where I lived, I would definitely be a little bit scared. I don't know if I would be completely happy with it, but I did really like learning more about how this could work in this book. I kind of loved how some of the wolves in this book almost mirrored in a way some of the human characters in the book as well. This was a really quick read for me as well. It was a really gripping read, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Then the next book I read was Someone to Look Up To by Gill. This is a book I've just had on my Kindle for a really long time, and this one is really simple. We're literally just following a big Pyrenees mountain dog called Sirius as he finds himself in the pound, and he looks back at like his life so far, his time growing up with his mother and his brothers and sisters, to his first family, and we're seeing how he was treated, how he was passed along to other people who didn't take care of him properly, and how he's now in the pound, like thinking about where he'll go next, who his real, you know, family are, will he ever find them, and you know, just wishing for, you know, for his proper family. And you know, if you're a dog lover, if you like doggy books like Marley and Me or A Dog's Purpose, this is one that you would probably like as well. There are some really sad moments in this one, particularly around when Sirius is in the pound, and we see how the dogs aren't treated properly, and how neglected they are by the people who run the pound. And yeah, there are just some really sad moments in this that like did really like get to me as a person who like absolutely adores dogs. There's a real kind of heavy-handedness in this book around positive reinforcement training, which is something that I would be for anyway, and I think anyone reading a book about dogs are probably maybe is into positive reinforcement anyway. I feel like we're well past the dominance, like kind of negative reinforcement training, kind of a Caesar Milan kind of thing. I think we're well past that. People know that that's not the way to go anymore when it comes to their dogs, but yeah, it felt a little bit heavy-handed at some parts of this book, but I did enjoy it and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Now the last book I want to talk about is The Push by Ashley Audrain. This was a 5-star read for me this month. I absolutely loved it. This is a domestic suspense thriller where we're following a woman called Blythe as she begins to start a family with her husband. She's kind of nervous about this, had good role models when it comes to mothering. Her mother wasn't a particularly good mother, and her grandmother before that wasn't a good mother either, and because of a myriad of reasons. And Blythe is really nervous about bringing a child into the world. She's hoping history doesn't repeat itself. So when she does have her baby, she is really struggling to connect with her child, and she just has a really hard time as a new mother, you know, like sleeplessness, fussy babies, you know, colic, all this sort of stuff that, you know, like is really hard for new parents, particularly when it's their first baby. And we see her struggle with all of this, and through all of this she's really struggling to connect with her daughter. And as her daughter grows older, she starts to realise that like something isn't quite right with her daughter. She really feels like there's something there that just is kind of chilling and calculating, and things start to happen around her daughter when her daughter grows up with like other children, and there's like different things that she's kind of like, is my daughter okay? And she starts to wonder if her daughter is like someone who could hurt other people, but no one will believe her. And this whole book is told through second person narrative, where we see the wife talking to her husband, and we see how again and again and again all her fears and worries have been dismissed by her husband. And this is just a fascinating look at motherhood in general, and then also like, you know, all the real bits about motherhood, the exhaustion, the terror, the fear, you know, the worry, all of the things that like mothers have to deal with, and then just the pressures as well to be the perfect mother all the time, and how hard that is. So it was all just done really well, and the whole time we do as a reader have to wonder if everything is in the author's mind. Is she imagining this about her child, or is her child actually possibly a sociopath? And you kind of have to just kind of figure it out yourself. And the end is so sweet. I really love the end. It was really good. Absolutely flew through this one. 5 stars, 100% recommend. So that's everything I read in May. Loads and loads of books there. If you guys have read any of these, I would love to know. I'd love to know your opinions, what you guys read this month. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye!